This podcast is brought to you by TriCounty Speaks, serving survivors of sexual assault in Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester counties.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana Keels. I am the Charleston County Victim Advocate at TriCounty Speaks. Today, I have with me Bradley Burris and Dean Kilpatrick. Bradley, can you tell listeners a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Ariana said, my name is Bradley. I'm the Prevention Education Coordinator for TriCounty Speaks. So just going out in the community, answering questions, giving trainings, and just, empowering our community to prevent sexual violence in any way that we can.
And then Mr. Kilpatrick, can you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Sure. My name is Dean Kilpatrick. I'm a professor of clinical psychology at the Medical University of South Carolina, and my day job is to run the National Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center, which is in the Department of Psychiatry. I'm also fortunate enough to have been a founding member of People Against Rape, which is now TriCounty Speaks. So do a little bit of everything, but for the last few decades, I've been involved in various aspects of crime victims' rights, and particularly work with sexual violence victims and survivors.
Thank you both for being here. Bradley and I are going to be kind of doing a co-proctoring, so we'll be both asking some questions to Mr. Kilpatrick. So the first question, it's a two-parter that I had is, first, how did TriCounty Speaks, formerly People Against Rape, come to be, and what was the plan behind it?
Well, like a lot of things that happen, they sort of happen fortuitously and perhaps without a plan, but actually how things got going is that in the late 60s, early 70s, it was sort of a rebirth of feminism in a lot of ways, and so there was a lot of attention being brought to problems that that women were having in society. And as a part of that, the National Organization for Women set up a series of consciousness raising groups in which women were getting together, wasn't being led by anybody, but basically having an opportunity to talk amongst themselves about problems that were going on in their lives and difficulties they were having, and strategize a bit about, how some of that was systemic in nature due to discrimination, societal discrimination against women, and what were some things that could be done to remedy that problem. So as a part of that, one of the things that people were noticing was that there was an astonishing number of women who were bringing up sexual victimization. I mean, also other kinds of intimate partner violence, but in particular, sexual victimization as children, adolescents, and then as adults, and how incredibly problematic that was for them, and how it had interfered in many ways with their ability to feel safe, to get on with their lives, and in terms of school, work, all kinds of things. So as a result of that, the National Organization for Women decided that there needed to be some public, education sessions to bring attention to that as a problem and to try to generate some interest in doing something about it. So a colleague of mine at work named Almadel Smith was the coordinator of the Charleston Now chapter, and set up a public meeting about the problem of rape and sexual assault, and invited me to go. I went. There were several people who were presenting their view of the sexual assault problem that existed, which included people talking about the law, talking about medical issues, talking about how frequent this was and what a problem it was. And there was a woman who was from Colombia who came and talked about how her I believe she was a 12-year-old daughter. They were visiting Charleston. Her daughter was in Hampton Park on a Saturday in the middle of the day and was raped. And about the horror stories about what had happened after that, the abysmal medical care, the law enforcement not taking it seriously, saying it was kind of the victim's fault. And as a result of that public meeting, I think there was not a soul there who was not just totally outraged and appalled about what was going on. And so, a few hotheads says, we've got to do something about this. There was a sign-up sheet that went around the room, and so I signed up, as did 6 or 7 other people, who then met, decided to meet, figure out what to do. And long story short, we decided that a rape crisis center needed to be formed. And actually, there were only about 3 or 4 in the country at that point. It was early in 1974. And so we got about doing that, and it was all volunteer. It was a consensus governance. I mean, there were no officers or anything like that, and everything had to be agreed to by everybody who was involved, and which made it difficult to get things done in a way. But it meant that once people had decided what needed to be done, everybody was on board and didn't go back biting, trying to undo what had happened before. So that's really what happened, was that we saw a problem. Victims and sexual assault victims in the TriCounty area had no services whatsoever, and so we didn't know any better and decided that somebody needed to do something about it, and that was us.
That's incredible. It really is.
Well, I mean, I have said, it sometimes before, had we known what we were getting into and how big a problem it was, and how difficult it would be to change all the things that needed to be changed, I don't know if we would have done it. But you're young, you're kind of semi-naive, not totally naive, but a little bit naive, and you're saying, well, what could be so hard? All we got to do is change the way the police operate, change the law, change the way the medical system works, change the hearts and minds of people to understand what a big deal it is, when many people don't even know what sexual assault is. And so all we got to do is just really change society, and then do it again and again, because there's turnover and new people come along. So, I mean, I don't know if anybody had told me in early 1974 that I would still be at it, like almost 50 years later. I'm not sure that, well, I wouldn't have believed you. And I mean, I couldn't, trying to figure out what you're going to do next week is hard, much less, that you're going to be doing something for a good part of your career.
No, absolutely. The evolution of sexual violence, it continues to change and, progress in different ways that I don't think any of us could have imagined. You talked about how you had that sign-up sheet, right, where 6 of you just said, this is an issue and we're willing to take the time and energy to try to address it. Who was involved in that initial planning and creation of PAR at the time?
Well, there were more who signed up, but basically it was about 6 or 8 people who came to several of the meetings after that and sort of settled in to be that, or to be that group. So among those, and I want to get this right, Almadel Smith, who I mentioned, was the coordinator for the Charleston Now chapter. By the way, she went away, got a PhD, went to wound up in Boston, and has now still come back to collaborate with us on our Mass Violence Center, is still around. But another person was Kathy Bartow, Dorothy Ferry, Ann Brunson, or Ann Lees Brunson. Debbie Morelli, Gene S.P.E.A.K.S, and me. So that was the core group.
Yeah, I mean, I personally at least owe you all a thank you, because just thinking about the work that this agency has done and how long it's been a part of our community. I mean, I know the countless people who have just said, wow, this, organization either educated me or assisted me in my healing journey. There was a lot that started from, that day in 1974. If you had to describe the initial mission of PAR, what would you say that it was or is?
Well, I would say it was twofold. I mean, if you sat anybody down in a group and said, okay, so what is going to be needed to address this problem? I think most people would have come up with the same two basic things, one of which was we need to improve services for victims and survivors who come forth and seek help. And then if you ask yourself the question, well, uh, how do you do that? What do you need to do that? You need to say, well, okay, so they need to have somebody that they can come to, they can talk to, who can help them navigate through the system, who kind of becomes, I guess, an expert on how what victims and survivors feel, what their problems are. They need to be able to talk to and facilitate somebody being able to talk to them. Um, and then there are a whole bunch of systems that need to change. I mean, in other words, law enforcement needs to change to understand more about the problem. The law was terrible, as I was saying. There was somebody doing sexual assault exams, but it was not being done very well. Victims were being charged for those exams in some cases. So, we said, so part of it was victim services, but then another part was education of the public as well as everybody else about what the problem of rape is like, what problems victims have, and then how people need to change what they're doing in order to make things easier for victims and encourage them to come forward. So the two parts of the mission were, one, how do we set up an accompaniment program, a counseling program, an advocacy program for victims so that they're getting what they need. But the other was literally educational and community education, rape prevention education, et cetera, et cetera. So those were really the two basic parts of the mission. And interestingly, if you think about it that way, those are still things that we need to work on, and they're still a core part of now TriCounty Speaks mission, because it's just, if you can't change the way people think about this, if you can't change hearts and minds about it, if you can't educate people about it, then there's you're kind of not totally wasting your time, but in large measure wasting your time in terms of dealing with the overall problem. And then if you can't provide sensitive, understanding services to these victims and survivors, then you haven't moved the needle in terms of how to deal with the problem.
Absolutely.
And I will say that I know, we talked about change and how things have progressed a lot. And I feel like I can definitely say, just from, a little bit of research that I've done, that just the creation of this organization has changed a lot of things. Like, I know you wrote this wonderful article that we'll try to link below, because it's a great read if you have the time, that a lot of things were adopted after that. You talked about laws and how law enforcement comes in. I can say, in 1996, which is after, People Against Rape was founded, that there was a victim Bill of Rights, put in place in South Carolina. So that's a really cool thing. Enforcement, you're still working on enforcement, right? But just having that in place and knowing that there's the demand for victims to be treated with dignity and respect is a really big thing, that there's now a SANE program where that forensic exam or rape kit gets done in MSC is a really big thing. The options and, victim advocacy that's in the law enforcement agencies in this area are really big. big change, since the founding. And then also you talked about the National Crime Victim Center. I know it's a little branch off, but can you tell us kind of how that came to be, since you're integral in that?
Well, that came to be, just to back up a little bit. So in 1974, when I got involved, I was working part-time at the medical university, part-time at the VA. And at the VA, I was working with veterans, including, a lot of veterans who were, World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, but also veterans of the Vietnam War. But when I started the work with PAR, and then basically, I was pulling call myself. I was, interacting with victims and saw some of the things that were going on there. And then being an academic, too, I looked at the academic literature, and there's virtually nothing on rape there and rape victims. And what there was, a famous book was How Victims Precipitate Their Own Rapes. This was like a big book in criminology, and so this was all the law enforcement people are looking at it from that perspective. So I said, we need to understand more about the mental health effects, because that was pretty obvious that needed to happen. So I approached my department chair at the time and said, I really want to see if I can kind of change my career a bit here and focus on victims of rape and trying to get better treatments and understand how to better understand the problems that victims are having. And so he said, well, this is pretty far out of the mainstream of mental health. And it was. And I've talked to several early people who were involved at that stage, and we've all had the conversation where somebody sat down with us and said, you seem like a kind of reasonably apt person, but why do you want to throw your career away by going off in this area that's just totally out of the mainstream of mental health? And I said, well, thank you, I appreciate that, but it ought to be in the mainstream of mental health. And so unless people do stuff, it'll stay out there in the Netherlands, and people won't get the benefit of that. So anyway, I started doing that. We got a grant actually in conjunction with People Against Rape from the National Institute of Mental Health to study rape victims longitudinally who had come into PAR to seek services, and also to develop and evaluate some mental health treatments for those that had problems. So, basically, we had something in 1978, I guess it was, or 77 really, when we founded, and it was very small at the time, something called the Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center, which then later became the National Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center, to do research, to have a clinic that provides services to victims of sexual assault and other kinds of crimes, and then also to do training, and also to do what we call public policy education, where we go and testify about things occasionally at the state level, as well as in some cases the national level. So it went from, and might have had a small part to do with it myself, but it went from something that was totally out of the mainstream to something that people recognized was being left out and ought to be in the mainstream. And then it cuts across everything. I know that in law school now, you would never have gotten anything about crime victims or crime victims' rights because they didn't exist before, but now they do. And so, that's been one of the positive things that's happened, is that there's more recognition of it, in a lot of different fields, but it's still really, really difficult you still see examples every day of how not enough people have gotten the message, or maybe they got the message, but they didn't implement the message.
Yeah. And now I know, we're hearing all about you. We know you were integral in the creation of our organization. You were integral in the creation of the National Crime Victim Center, which we use as a resource for a lot of our clients. and just the general public as well, because it's crime, violent crimes in general, not just sexual assault specifically. So, that's two for you in the two things that I'm involved in. And I know that you're also a current board member for the organization that Bradley and I work for, now known as TriCounty Speaks. And you're a part of, helping with that, some of the changes that we've made. And thinking of change, what are some things you kind of see this organization implementing, or some direction you'd like to see the organization kind of implement?
Well, one of the things, there's an old saying that the more things change, the more things stay the same. And I am not satisfied with the progress that has been made to date in the area of sexual violence. Full stop. I don't know. I've stuck with this area and with former People Against Rape and now TriCounty Speaks for a long time. And I think it's because I realize how vital this organization is in terms of trying to facilitate the changes that we need, and the improvement in victim services that we need, and the improvement in public education, and the improvement in prevention efforts that we need. So the first thing that I would say is we have definitely made progress, but we haven't made enough progress. And so one of the reasons I've stayed with it is because I want to see our organization be excellent. I want to see it really move the needle more so than it's been able to in the past. And to do that, it's going to have to do two things, one of which is public awareness. In terms of that we exist, what we do, how vital what we do is, and how much we need public health and help in terms of emotional support, volunteer support, and financial support from the community in order to be able to do things better. So that's one thing. The second thing is that there are always evolving needs and more recognition of how sexual assault is not something that just happens to women. It doesn't just happen to adult women. It doesn't just happen to women who are heterosexual. It happens to men, boys, girls of all ages. How pervasive the effects are, and so there always needs to improve services and to recognize what parts of the people who've been affected by sexual violence are underserved, and what we need to do differently in order to be able to reach them and to provide them services that are appropriate for for who they are and what they need.
Absolutely. I think we can both agree on that.
Yes. I definitely, that was my last question. Bradley, did you have another question for Dean?
Not necessarily a question, but more so just, I think we're all looking forward to the progression of TriCounty Speaks, and a lot of us want the same thing, which is just the community to know that we're here and that we have energy and we have passion and that we're willing to do whatever it takes to just make the community better and eradicate sexual violence, not only for our service area, but for the entire country.
Well, I could not agree with that more. And so, fortunately, I don't know. I mean, I literally never envisioned that I would have had the career that I've had. I never would have envisioned that I would have had a career that has allowed me at times a microphone to, and a megaphone to, at least try to get the message out. And so I'm still after it, and I still think that it's frustrating to me that we have not figured out how to do a better job of getting that message out. But it is so crucial to the health of any community to eradicate sexual violence. whether it's sexual harassment, whether, you know, in part, and TriCounty Speaks is interested in all sexual violence, but you know, it is really also focusing on the more serious types that create. I mean, but it's all serious. And so we need to recognize that it's all together. We need to, as they say, a great organization called the Ending Violence Against Women International, which start by believing. And so the issue we all need to deal with in these high profile cases, anytime a woman comes forward, or a girl, or I mean, I'm just using that, I mean men too, but it's really, it is more of a problem for women than it is for men. I mean, it's about twice or three times as big a problem, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't address the problems of men too, but it is more of a problem for women. But we have the law historically says we should not believe victims. If either of you heard of Lord Hale, the English jurist?
Not me.
Okay. Lord Hale was in about the 17th century or something like that in England, and he was very influential. He also, by the way, presided over witch trials in England. But one of the things that he believed very strongly, that accusations of rape were very easy for people to make, for women to make, is the way he described it. He thought that juries were so likely to believe any of these accusations, and that men had such a hard time defending themselves against these accusations, that there needed to be some special instructions that jurors received from the judge in rape trials. And these are not part of any other kind of criminal procedure at all, but the special instructions were, and up until the late 60s and early 70s in the US, a whole lot of jurisdictions had this in the law. If it's a rape trial, when they're charging the jury, they have to say, very easy to bring a charge of rape, very hard for the defendant to defend himself if accused of rape. So therefore, you need to give special scrutiny to the testimony of the victim in this case, more so than any other witnesses in the case. So when you think about it, what does that do to the law? I mean, that sets up a situation where, you know, jurors are saying, oh, well, it's really easy for these people to do this. The poor guy is probably going to get convicted if I don't pay attention to this. So what we need to do is scrutinize her testimony more so than the defendants or any other witnesses. So that's just an example of how pervasive it is that we don't believe victims. And as long as that's true, it's going to be incredibly difficult to have somebody arrested in acquaintance rape cases, which are the majority of those cases. It's going to be very hard to get a strict investigation of that cases and bring charges. And it's going to be hard to get any convictions. And so, you know, it's just like, that's the part where the progress has really sucked, to use a technical term. And that, it's just imperative that we get accurate information out there so that members of the community realize how important all this is, so that they will be more likely to believe victims.
Absolutely.
You've given us a lot to think about and a lot to continue to work on, right?
Well, I'll keep after it, if you will. Let's put it that way.
Sounds great.
I feel called to action, and I hope people listening feel called to action too, because like, Mr. Kilpatrick said, like everything, this involves everyone and everything. It's not just, the victims. It's not just the police. It's not just the folks working at the hospital performing the exams, or even us working at the agencies. This involves everyone in the public: men, women, children, non-binary folks, gender diverse folks. So
well, one thing that I'm reminded of is there was a quote by Leo Tolstoy, who is the Russian author, who was also involved as a war correspondent, and so saw a lot of trauma during his life, which informed his work. But there's a quote from him that I've always liked, which is that he said, "Everyone would like to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves." And that becomes pretty profound when you think about it, because it's easy for me to get up here and saying, we need to change this, we need to change that, we need to change something else. But really, to get the kind of change that we really need, we need to all take a careful look at ourselves and to work hard on changing ourselves individually to combat, the sexism, to combat the racism, to combat a lot of attitudes and beliefs that we have, and we need to change ourselves and make ourselves more capable of believing victims when they come forward and providing them with the help and services they need.
Absolutely.
Each of us needs to do that.
I don't think I could have said it any better. So,
Well, when you steal from Tolstoy, I mean, there are a lot of people who have lived profound lives and who have managed to capture some pretty profound sentiments. So anyway, I just appreciate the opportunity. Want to thank you for what you do for TriCounty Speaks, and to thank you for your dedication and for the opportunity to pontificate a little bit here.
thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll learn more from you and continue on your work and make you proud.
Well, and I look forward to learning from both of you as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.